Hey everyone, welcome to a new video, welcome to my channel. My name is Maaike and today's video is going to be about my favorite thing ever, eyeshadow palettes. You know I love eyeshadow palettes. It's some of my favorite content to make. It's my favorite makeup product to try out, and I think that since I'm currently on a complete neutral kick, I just thought we could talk about the best of the best neutral eyeshadow palettes that are currently on the market. I selected 15 neutral palettes that are personally my favorites for several reasons, and I'm just going to talk you through each one of them so that you have a full lowdown. This video is not going to focus on like a particular kind of neutral palette. I just want to do a full roundup, and then next month, so stay tuned if you're interested in this, but next month I will make sure to do a overview of like all the cool tone palettes that I have in my collection. I don't think I will only have it feature neutrals though, because cool tones can also of course be more colorful. So that's going to be this next month. This month we are doing just 15 best of the best neutral eyeshadow palettes, because I started off this new year on a complete neutral kick, and so I wanted to make sure I could share these with you. So I hope you are as excited for this one as I am. I will make sure to link as many of these in the description box below, because a lot of these I did already review on my blog. So I'm not going to be including swatches or looks, because I have 3 looks with I think almost every palette here. There may be a few that I didn't showcase on my blog yet, but I will make sure to link as much as I can in the description box below. So for the first 2 palettes that I want to share, and if you've seen my content, you know that these are coming, because 2 of my all-time favorite palettes are the Lorac Pro 3 and the Urban Decay Naked 3. And the reason why these are some of my favorites is because as a fair girl with a neutral undertone, I, for a very long time, struggled finding good neutral palettes that allowed me to not only use every single shade in the palette, but also where I felt it really complemented my skin tone. I think that with neutrals, you really have to find what works with your complexion a lot more than with colorful looks, I feel. I think like a bright, colorful eye, almost everyone can pull off, but with neutrals, it's so dependent on undertones, which when this one came out, the Lorac Pro 3, I was super happy because this is a fair, neutral undertone girl dream. Like, this is your perfect palette if you have a complexion very similar to mine. If you're much deeper than me, this is absolute trash because it's too fair. It just is. If you have a very warm, like olivey undertone, this is going to look gray on you. Not going to work. But if you are, like me, right smack in the middle, between cool and really warm undertones in your skin, then this is a beautiful, beautiful palette. This was the first neutral palette to come out where I felt I could use every single shade. This black isn't too black, for instance, so it works quite well. This truffle shade is like a black and brownish gray, so it pulls a bit more cool toned, and that's something I like about this too, that you have some cooler tones but also some warm tones, so you can really sort of customize your look, you could say. I love the shimmers in this. I know that everybody hates medallion, but for me it works really well if I use my finger. And you can tell, hopefully, by how many dents there are in this palette that I absolutely love this. So for me, this is just a perfect palette, and this is still available. I think that goes for all of the palettes I'm showing you today. They are still on the market, so you can still get them even if they are a little bit older, such as this one. So let's just get into that other palette I was showing, the Urban Decay Naked 3. This is even older than the Lorac one I just showed you, and this is again one that I love. I've been using this a ton this month, and what I love about this palette, again, I can use every single shade in the palette. This is again quite fair. It just is. It just is. And that's why I feel that a lot of people didn't like this, because again, it pulled quite gray toned on them. I think that if you are looking for these rosy tones but you have a deeper complexion or a warmer complexion, then Anastasia's Soft Glam is a really good alternative, because that's got those rosy undertones as well. And a brand that everyone ignores, but the Balm's Nude palette. Very similar to this, but for me both of those are quite dark and everything looks quite like sultry straight away. Whereas with this I feel I can do a very pretty everyday look. Favorite shades in here are definitely Trick, this rose gold in the middle, but I also really like Mugshot, and it's really with this palette, it took me a long time to get into these shades towards the end, but Blackheart is a stunning liner. Mugshot I love as one shade look, like a one shadow look. Factory and Liar are pretty stunning as well. These Urban Decay Naked palettes are known, like the earlier renditions, for not having too many mattes. I personally don't mind that because I don't mind using a more satin shade that if you blend it looks a little bit more matte in the crease or in the outer V. So for me, this is still at the top. I know it's not everyone's favorite, but yeah, these are just really, really up there for me. So if we're sort of like going from like most favorite and then sort of going into different categories, I have another one that I absolutely adore. And I was using this quite a bit last month. This is the Tartelette in Bloom. I just recorded a 3 looks 1 palette with this. So if you're curious to see that, I will make sure to link it in the eye above. This is one of my all-time favorite palettes, you guys, especially again, for the reason that I can use every single shade in this palette and have no issues with it. This palette is a little bit differently in its setup though than the other two, because in this one you essentially get 3 quads. The first one here at the top being a bit more cool toned, this one being a bit more neutral, and the bottom one being a bit more warm toned. So depending on your complexion, I think that this is just a really easy one to work with. Also, if you're a beginner and you don't want to put too much thought into how to put a look together, I feel this works really well because you can stick to each one of these quads and you have a complete look. It's got more mattes than shimmers, so also if you're looking for something like that, I think this palette has your back. It's got a really pretty undertone. Again, it has those deeper shades to deepen something up, but if you're fair like me, you will also be able to use every single shade that's in here, so that's lovely. And then a palette that I don't hear anybody talking about, but I believe again that this is still available, and that's the Stila Eyes Are the Window palette. Now, this is a palette that sort of features all of Stila's ultimate like favorite eyeshadows, it seems. It's got Kitten, and one of these is called Pigalle. I know those are like 2 infamous Stila shades. I have mine in Windows of the Spirit, I believe, yeah. Eyes Are the Window of the Spirit, and this is just, again, it's got more shimmers than matte, so at this point in time, I'm like, is that really something that we still see a lot in 2020? But it has a couple of shades that I just reach for whenever I think of like, oh, I want to do that kind of look. And the shade I reach for the most is this grayish blue tone, and also this cool tone next to it. That makes for a very subtle smoky eye together, and I love it. You get 1, 2, 3 mattes. This is almost like a matte, but more like a shimmer, like a satin. But it just has some really stunning basic neutrals. This is one of those palettes that you can just reach for, and you know you will get a pretty look. So this is again like the Tarte. I feel very foolproof, especially if you're a beginner with makeup. These shadows practically blend themselves, and this is just one of those palettes I'm like, nobody was talking about these little Stila palettes when they came out, apart from like the matte one. I think that got quite a bit of traction, but I ended up picking up this one, and I'm still, till this day, so many years down the line, I'm still happy I have this. But if you watch any of my videos, then you will know that I love a good cool toned, and like cool toned palettes can be really hard to find, which is why I want to do that video in February to show you that there's just so much out there, but most of the makeup community just seems to ignore it because so many people favor warm tones. And it's true that warm tones probably work best for like 75% of the population. However, if you're quite fair, or if you have like a neutral or a cool undertone, then cool palettes just work better on you. And so I did wanted to, of course, mention a couple of cool tone palettes. And I think one of my all-time favorite cool tone palettes is one that, because of the packaging, I ignored for a very long time. Now this, I think it's on its way out because I can no longer find this in stores. However, I did look this up to see if you could still get it somewhere, and it is still available on the Too Faced website. So I just wanted to throw it out there that if you are now seeing this palette and you're like, oh, I don't own that, I would like to get it, you may want to be quick. But Too Faced has been really weird about discontinuing or not discontinuing things. Like, they don't really let you know. I mean, those blushes, the heart-shaped blushes, they seem to discontinue and then they're still available. So They're a bit weird, but still. This is the Chocolate Bonbons palette, and if I had to pick a cool tone palette that gives you a lot of options, it will be this one. This is not the kind of cool tone palette that will only feature neutrals, as you can see, because you do get these like pops of color at the bottom. So if, for instance, the Stila palette is one that you're like, I kind of like that grayish blue it has, but I don't like a lot of the warmth that it has as well, because that's more like warm and like cool tones all in one. I want something that's more neutral, like cool tone leaning. Then this palette has a very similar shade here in Earl Grey. This Totally Fetch shade seems a bit out there and pretty bright, but I really like this actually as a crease shade to have something like a little bit more fun. That's also a look I did, I think, when I reviewed this. But other than that, if you cover these two up, I'm not sure if I can show you this. If you cover this up, it's quite neutral. So if you take that out of the equation, you get all the lovely cool tone neutrals that you could possibly want. It's got a good array of mattes. It's got a good array of shimmers. You do get a couple of shades to like deepen things up as well, so that works. You get two like larger lighter shades, but my favorite highlight shade in the palette is this pinky one. This is called Sprinkles. This is really, really stunning in the inner corner. I also really like Cafe au Lait. That shade has probably seen the most use. And I also really like Molasses Chip in here. So this is just a really good versatile if you want the most out of a cool tone palette and it's not too bland and boring and you want to have a little bit more excitement, this would be my favorite. But what if you do want all the boring neutrals? Then I still think that the OG, I think this was one of the very first cool tone palettes on the market, the Naked 2 by Urban Decay would be my favorite. This together with the Lorac Pro 3 and the Naked 3, it goes into like my top 3 favorite palettes of all time. These are the 3 palettes, Lorac Pro 3, Naked 3, and Naked 2. If they discontinue with them or if I hit pan, I'm going to go out and buy a backup. Like, I cannot live my life without these 3 palettes. Not gonna lie. This is what it looks like, again, because like the Naked 3, it doesn't have a lot of mattes, and I think that these 2 warmer tones just need to be ignored. I kind of start the palette from here and then work my way down, and also Blackout is one I don't use a lot. So this is why it's not like the most perfect of perfect palettes, you could say, because there are 3 shades in here that I just never reach for when I reach for this palette. It really goes here, and as you can see, dip, dip, huge dip as well. Like, I have a couple of shades in here that I know I can hit pan on, and I mainly go into this palette for like these shades here. Busted is lovely as a liner. I love YDK either just all over the lid as like a one wash of color kind of look, or really nicely tapped all over the lid. And Suspect is one of the best taupes ever made. So that's why I personally really like this. I know this isn't for everyone. You may want to have a few more mattes on hand if you prefer mattes over shimmers. I personally don't mind it. I still get a lot of use out of this palette, and it's an OG cool tone palette for a reason. If you're looking for a more like upgraded or updated version of a cool tone palette, then I would recommend the ABH Sultry palette. When this came out, I knew I had to have it just because it has so many lovely cool tones. I do have to say that for me, these 2 shades, this Bloom shade is nice. It's nice, again, like in the Too Faced palette, to have something brighter, just to have something a bit more playful and not have it be too brown and boring. But this Birch Shades is just a hair too warm, I feel, to really go with the palette as a good transition shade. Right now, you just have Twig, and then this Taupean is a little bit too dark already. So I wish that this shade would be cooler, and then it would have worked a lot better for me in this palette particularly. But you get some stunning shimmers in here. Cyborg is like an off silver, like it's not a straight up silver. It has a bit more interest in it. It's not too bright, like silvers can be like really like boo, kapow, which is nice, but this is a bit more muted and it has like a grungier edge to it. But then you get a couple of these browns like Cinder and I think over here Ember. Those two are stunning. And then you have rose quartz. Steampunk is a gold, but it's not a gold that is very, very warm leaning. It almost seems to have a hint of like something green to it, pulling it a little bit more cool toned. So for me, the Sultry is one of my favorites out of the entire ABH line. It's so stunning, works really well. This formula a lot of people love for a good reason. It's really soft, very blendable, and ABH always has a good variety of mattes and shimmers in their palettes. But we can also find cool tones at a slightly more affordable price point, namely Zoeva. I think the most overlooked brand on the planet is Zoeva in terms of eyeshadow. They have lovely quality and their prices have been like going up over the years, but I still feel it's worth it. This palette is the En Taupe, and this is, again, if you're fair, you can make this work. If you're any deeper than me, this is just going to muddy up on you because it's very bland. But if you want that, if you want just some good staple neutrals, this is such a great cool tone palette for that. It has 1, 2, 3, 4 mattes, so that's good. Everything else in here has a bit of a shimmer to it, but I think that, for instance, this shade here could function as a matte very easily if you blend it well. But where it's at for me in this palette is these two shimmers, because these look really, really boring in the pan, but they are duochromes. This pulls blue and this pulls pink, which you don't see in the pan at all. This one needs a little bit more building up. This one goes full on, straight on. And then you just get a couple of really nice basic taupey shimmers. So this is very sort of one like monochromatic color scheme. So you may want to pull something in to deepen it up, or perhaps have a few more mattes on hands. It's not perfect per se, but in terms of cool tones, they definitely nailed that color story. And then last but not least, this is not the most affordable palette on the market, but I definitely also wanted to make sure I mentioned a couple of good drugstore options. And Milani is one, of course, that everybody loves. I love their Soft and Sultry palette. So this is very similar to that Stila palette I just showed you, but then this is all cool tones. I do have to say that I feel that the only true cool tone row you get in here is this middle one. The rest in here, I feel still, it just depends on how you put it all together, and it can still look either cool toned or a little bit more warm toned. I just don't think it's as cool toned as, for instance, the Naked 2 or the En Taupe. Those are more true cool tones. This is a little bit more in the middle, I feel, and depending on where you live and where you buy this, this can be affordable or quite expensive. Right now in Europe, this retails for at least 27 euros, which is more than the Zoeva palette. Just saying. In the US, you can get this for $15. So depending on where you get it, this could be affordable or it could be atrociously expensive. The next category for me would be palettes that are neutral, but that have a little bit more color to them, that have like a particular color story. We saw sort of like Morphe starting to do this with like oranges, and then everybody started to do that. ABH did it with the Mono Renaissance and implementing berries. I feel that Decay has started doing this right now with that like honey palette that they're doing with these more like yellows and mustards. So neutrals do not have to be taupes and browns. It just doesn't have to be. It can be a little bit more interesting. And a brand that has come out with quite a recent release that I feel does that really well is Huda Beauty. These Nude Obsessions palettes are really lovely. There are 3 of them. I don't have the medium one because it's quite warm toned and that's not what I like. But I have the light, which is borderline cool toned. I wish that this transition would be more cool toned to make it work a bit better. But you do get some cooler tones here. This shimmer is lovely all over the lid. It's got a good variety of mattes and shimmers, but I felt that looking at this, while it goes really well with my complexion, it's a bit bland. It's a bit like the En Taupe by Zoeva, very monochromatic, and there's not a lot of variety I would get out of this. So I bought the Rich as well. I bought this to sort of go with the other palette because I felt that this would give me the depth and dimension that the other palette is lacking. For me, this is a much better transition shade than the shades that are in that palette, for instance. You get a really nice deep shades to darken things up. This shimmer is stunning on the lower lash line, and I love using this shade in the middle to deepen things up. So if I put these together, actually, then you will hopefully see what's going on here. These kind of slot together really nicely and make up one palette. I don't own the new Nude by Huda Beauty because that has 2 pressed glitters and a cream, and I felt it was a bit expensive for a palette that's 18 palettes, but essentially 15 because I know I would barely use those 3 shades. So with this, buying 2 of these, it's more affordable than that large palette, and I get 18 shades that I know I will get the use out of. But I think the neutral palette currently on the market that does sort of like neutrals but with a twist, maybe you saw this one coming, the Anastasia Dan Gold palette. This is a palette that I wasn't sure I was going to love, and then I tried it over the summertime and I absolutely adore this. This is, again, a lot of browns on this side, a really nice yellow gold in the middle, and then you get like a mustard and like this like tealy green, and then these 3 shimmers for that amplified like extra bit on top. So again, if you want a palette that can do the boring neutrals but doesn't have to, then this is the palette for you. I also feel that depending on how you blend everything together in this palette, you get different looks every single time. A lot of these shades seem to almost transform and take on properties of the shadows that you're putting them next to. I know it sounds incredibly crazy to say that, but especially this shade here in the top, in the palette, it looks like a bronzy goldy shade. But I feel that if you put it with these like greens, it almost pulls a bit more green. The white does the same thing. You get 6 mattes and everything else in here is shimmer, which to me is a good like array. And this palette just does something that a lot of other neutral palettes doesn't do. It plays with textures. So it doesn't just, like the mattes aren't just straight up mattes, like every single one will do something differently. The shimmers have different textures and qualities to them as well. And I feel that that really makes this palette, where as a lot of neutral palettes nowadays just like have like mattes and shimmers and then that's it. But this adds texture into the mix, and that's why it's a much more interesting palette, and that's why it's one of my favorites. But an affordable brand that I think can get you in a very similar direction as the Anastasia Dan for like a 1/10 of the price. This is the Dream Street palette with Kathleen Lights, and to me this is the most interesting palette that ColourPop currently stocks, apart from those monochromatic colorful palettes. In terms of palettes, ColourPop do a lot of neutrals, and I already have so many staple neutral palettes that I was like, you know, ColourPop, if I'm going to buy one of your neutral palettes, I needed to have something extra. I needed to have a twist, and this palette has it. It has a more warm-leaning color story, I have to say. But then you get these like deep turquoisey, tealy shades, and that's why I say it can do something similarly as the Anastasia Dan, where you get your standard mattes and neutrals and like something a bit more corally to push it into that direction. But then if you pull in the teals, then it goes more teal. You get this really stunning duochrome here that's very similar to their single in Glass Bull. This is called Kaleidoscope though, so it's not exactly 100% the same, but I feel they can do something very similarly. So I again feel that this palette is just really stunning quality. And if you're looking for a neutral palette that can do more than just neutrals and give a little bit of color and a little bit more interest to a look, and you don't want to splurge on an Anastasia Dan palette, which I totally understand, then I think ColourPop's Dream Street is actually a really close, not a dupe, because I think this actually came out first, but it can do something similarly if you'd like. But in terms of undertones, what I currently have been really liking is these like yellowy tones from the Urban Decay Naked Honey, but I didn't want to feature another Urban Decay palette in this video. And then I was like, you know what's a really good neutral palette that has that yellow tone to it? Zoeva Plum Fusion. And again, this was out way before the Urban Decay Naked palette. So that Naked Honey palette came out this fall, and this has been out for at least 3 or 4 years, I think. This is a stunning neutral palette. It's got mattes and then shimmers. So it's got a full row of mattes, full row of shimmers. And as you can see, these mattes are like different undertones. You can do different things with them. But for me, where it's at is the shimmers, and especially this shade here. Late Bloomer is really pretty. It's actually like a honey shade, come to think of it. But then you also get these like yellow tone golds, and that I think can give you a very similar vibe to what you can find in the Naked Honey, but again at like half the price, which I love. And this palette has just been out for a lot longer. And this white, do you think that's a straight up white? No, of course not. It's Zoeva palette. They tend to throw in at least one duochrome these days, and this is a white with a gold shift. So goes really well with this, goes really well with this if you want to keep it very basic and just throw this in the inner corner, or put this all over the lid for that sparkle but have an otherwise like neutral look. I think this works really well. It doesn't go too deep. Again, remember, I'm pretty fair, so this is the deepest I typically go for any palette. So again, in terms of versatility, but still having an interesting color story, but still being neutral, I think the Plum Fusion palette by Zoeva is one that is incredibly overlooked. But what about those matte neutral lovers out there? Because I personally love shimmer over matte. Like for me, I don't need a matte. I don't need it to be 50-50 mattes and shimmers for, you know, a palette to work for me. I feel I can make a look with just shimmers. I do, however, think that a lot of people, especially if they start with makeup, they would like to have some really good mattes. And I think that mattes are, again, essentials in most makeup kits. But I would say find a really fun palette and then perhaps add on something like this, a stack by Melt with mattes. And this is their Rust stack. And this is one of my favorite matte formulas. Like Melt mattes are stunning. This is pricey for how much shadow you get, I think. Not the quantity of shadow, but just the quantity of shades. Because this only comes with 5 shades. And you pay like 45 euros for it, which is a lot. You do get a ton of product in each one, I believe. Yeah, this is almost 3 grams of product in each pan, which is a lot. But this is, again, pretty travel friendly, has a mirror in the lid, and then you get this, like, this is a bit more of a satin, I believe. It is matte, but it seems to have a bit of a shine to it. This is Classic, which is like a really nice matte, like creamy shade. Then there is this one. This is Antique, which is a nice, like, well, peachy shade, you could say. This is my favorite in the entire stack. This is the reason why I bought it, Rubbish, which is like a baby poop brown kind of shade. It really goes well with like mustards and like those yellow tones from the Plum Fusion that this really goes really nicely with. And then you get a more like chocolatey brown with like a reddish undertone. This is Rust. And then you get a very nice, like more cool tone brown called Rot. And this, I think, is, if you want to go all matte, Melt stacks are stunning. It's very nice and curated, so you get a lot that you can still get a lot of versatility out of. And for me, a matte palette like this sort of slots in a shimmer palette. I think that if you don't want to spend that much money, but you still want something very nice and curated when it comes to mattes, I think these little dose of color palettes are really, really nice. These now come in an array of colors, and this so far has been my favorite, but I also have the berries one, and very, very recently, it just came in the other day, I also got the pretty cool one, but it also comes in warm tone. So if you're more of a warm tone person and you're not the same undertone and skin tone as I am, then maybe you want to look in the other color stories they have. But this is the Marvelous Mauves. And this is Mavi tones. And this, for instance, goes really well with the Naked 3. So if you feel that the Naked 3 doesn't have enough mattes, then maybe slot in something like this. Like, it goes really well with that. It goes, maybe not for everyone. It may not go deep enough for most people. But for me, this goes deep enough. It is all matte. This has a very nice, lovely, soft texture. My favorite way to wear this palette, however, isn't to slot it in with something else. I will do a fully matte look with this and then take one of my Stila Glitter and Glows and tap that all over the lid for that added bit of sparkle and interest. These little dose of color palettes are super cleverly done. Again, for how much you get, yeah, you get less than 2 grams in every pan. So it's almost 10 grams of product for 5 shades, so that's okay. but these are quite expensive. They're like 30, 35 euros by now. So that's a little bit up there in price. But I feel again that in terms of mattes, this is some of the best quality I've ever worked with. So there you have it. Those were 15 palettes that I think are the best of the best neutral eyeshadow palettes. This is of course completely subjective because these are my personal favorites. Maybe you have very different ones. I think that if you're more of a warm toned lover, that your best picks would look completely different. So let me know in a comment down below what your favorite neutral eyeshadow palette is. I'm very curious to know. I love trying out new things. And yeah, stay tuned because next month I will be coming out with that cool toned palette overview. I just want to rope all of the cool tones together and do like one giant overview of like what I have of all the cool tones that are out there and sort of talk about those palettes then. So that will be coming up, and of course I have in the meantime 3 videos a week. 1 video a week on my booktube channel in case you're interested. That's called Floating in Books. So go follow me over there if you didn't know that yet. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day. Hope to see you in my next one. Bye!